Hi, welcome to Rhetoric Rabbit Hole. Thanks for joining us this evening. Today I got Jessie Stilwagen of Midgard Musings, and I got Philip as well. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Phil?
I am doing wonderful.
Okay, good. Um, so I've been watching a lot of your videos, Jesse, in anticipation of this because I was really excited to talk to you. And I think it's funny because um, I just found out about your channel. Like, Neef told me about it like a week ago, I think.
Wow.
And because like I've seen you around though, like you're the dude. The way I knew you is the dude with the kilt at every fucking metal show, throwing down. That's how. Because I like, and when he told me about your channel, I was like, no shit, and I went and checked that out, and I'm like, man, small world, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, small world. Middle Tennessee, the Middle Tennessee area. If I got a dime, for every time somebody was like, "Hey, you're the guy from whatever," it's kind of
Yeah,
kind of neat. But thank you.
yeah. And one of the things I really thought was interesting when I was going through your catalog. You had that video you just put up with what was that fellow's name you were with this last one?
Yeah. So my recent video was with Eric Shervin. He hosts he has a YouTube channel and he also has Facebook, but his YouTube channel is The Ravens Call, or that's his show on YouTube. It's The Ravens Call. So
Nice.
he's located out in East Texas.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering where he came from because you guys got into ritual a lot. Um, and it was an interesting conversation. And one of the things you guys talked about was tribalism
Mhm.
and the application of tribalism. How um, I mean, there's a purpose for that mindset, and
Yeah,
I think that's also something innate about us, right? Like that's sort of the archetypal. It's just that's part of us, and that's part of our nature, and we can fight that, but it comes back to it. And I mean, it's sort of a duality also because you have the people you're comfortable with, and you don't share everything with every you know
right.
you put walls up, but you can't distance yourself too far from other people because it's other perspectives that give us insight and change us and make it better.
For sure. Yeah. No. So like the whole concept of for me at least, so in tribalism, I think that encompasses a lot of different cultures, around the world, not just me specifically being a pagan, that or Norse approach to paganism. Um, but the tribal elements, the tribal identity, uh, is not something that is foreign in many other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the importance behind it lies within, like you say, how much you share with people, how much people know about certain things, how much you open up to certain people. That is reserved for your inner circles, um, and the tribal mentality of tribal heathenry, for me at least, is really about defining the, I guess, barriers, you could say, inner circle versus the
Mm-hmm.
outer yard or outer circle, as it were.
I think you said something in that one along the lines of you prove yourself in your family and your community, and then you go out into the world with that thing, like like you make yourself in the small so that you have something to contribute to the large. I guess. It's,
Yeah. So with me specifically, and then with many other heathens who kind of adopt a tribal mentality, um, I, half of everybody, but I think there's a lot of similarities in my opinions versus with others as well. And that is that, you know you've got to have a strong and solid hearth or home
mm,
before you can even think about having a beneficial or strong or established tribe, because the tribe is the extension of your clan, and your clan is your makes up
Immediate.
like your hearth, your immediate home.
Yeah.
So my hearth, my home, my direct obligation lies with my clan, my immediate family, and then the extension of that is my tribe.
Mm-hmm.
But everything has to start at the home, at the hearth.
Right. Yeah. Which, like, what was I gonna say? Oh, like, and I mean, there's practical application to that. And this is going to be a slight tangent, but bear with me. I promise there's a point if you hang in there. Um, there's so I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, which isn't the worst cult, but it's a cult by all definitions I can think of. Philip also comes from that same background. We grew up together, and this is sort of it's a very personal thing, like that I can't really, like, you don't, it's one of those things like you don't really know unless you're in it. I can describe it, but it's different than the way it sounds.
Sure.
Because like whenever like a victim of domestic abuse talks about their abuse, it's like they may talk about it in a light way that doesn't even like do justice to the injury, because they don't even see the full impact of what's been done. Anyway, that was a different tangent than the one I initially meant to go on. But anyway, cults. What happens is if your tribe is too like-minded, and they're just all yes men, they agree with each other, and it's not about the pursuit of knowledge, it's just about making sure you don't step on anyone's toes, then it grows to a place of stagnance. And I see this in I mean, even in our area, like in this region, you see little things pop up,
Yep.
like art collectives and what I would call a cult, where it's like it's very cliquey and yeah.
So the problem with it, I think, is that you get a group together, you get people who want tribes so bad. They want it because, like you mentioned earlier, right? It's almost inherent in human nature to want to belong to something. You've got the nomad types, you've got the ones who are better off alone and that are kind of drawn from structure of society enough, and that's another thing. But the larger human collective, I think, thrives and seeks some sort of togetherness and wanting to belong to something. And that's what tribe can do. The thing about it is if you force it, and if you don't let it become something that is an organic growth, then you're setting it's setting itself up for failure, because you get too much of that, well, I'm the boss. No, I'm the boss. There's not this overall like consensus. The thing about how a tribe should work properly is that, yes, you have a societal structure within your tribe. Like you have your leaders, you have your representatives that are kind of the ones to be that protector of the overall luck of the tribe, right? You have your chieftain, your Gothi leader, whatever, at least in Germanic heathenry. You have those figures, but they are by no means, it's not an authoritarian type approach. It's not like what I say goes. There's this consensus that exists. There's what is good for the tribe, and the tribe has to be, trusting their leaders enough, and the leaders have to be in a position to do the right thing for the overall luck of the tribe and the overall good of the tribe. There's some trust elements, and which goes into some of the more deeper dive stuff that kind of gets into like an arch worldview. It's definitely not like an authoritarian or dictatorship by any means. It's
like everyone has to be there consensually and
exactly
for the right reasons.
Right.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. And like, think about my tribe, like the people I congregate with and congregate around me. It's like we're all pursuing an understanding. It's like we're all sharpening each other. It's not like we'll like push those boundaries rather than like, oh, I better stay away from that subject because I know that's a sore subject. It's like, no, we prod each other and poke each other and try to break those conditionings down, you know. And I think I mean, and that works because the tribe has a good goal to focus on, and it's not mind. You're trying to sharpen each other.
Yeah, it definitely, like for me and the folks that may be looking at the type of view that I have, or that are similar in this view. It's not that what's good for one person. It's what's good for all. What is going to be good for the tribe. We're
Right.
looking out for the collective.
Mm-hmm. And that's that's the thing to do. That's what to uphold. This is a good segue because I wanted to talk about. I would consider myself a Satanist, but where we start getting into, I don't believe in a literal Satan. I believe in a philosophical what he represents: rebellion, anarchy, and light. You know, bringing light to man.
Satan in the term of, like, are we talking like Luciferian, or just the idea, the concept of this?
I'm actually not familiar with Luciferian Satanism very well. What I'm describing is I worship the ideal that Satan represents.
So self-worship mainly.
Yeah, yeah.
Got it.
Well, and that, and a major component to me is, Lucifer is the shining one. It's the light bringer. He hands you the apple. He doesn't ask you for anything. He just gives freely knowledge. Which, we were talking about cults. What a cult is that's the Christian God in heaven saying, I have toys that you guys don't, and I'm keeping this knowledge hidden from you. And Satan, the cult buster, he says, I'm giving that knowledge that you're putting on a pedestal, I'm giving that to everyone. And now you can argue whether that was a good thing to do or not, because clearly we fucked a lot of shit up.
Well, so it's an interesting thing to bring up, because one of my very, very close friends, who I will bestow the title of titles on very, very few, he is a brother to me. And when I say someone is a brother to me, then that means that I would do almost anything for this person. And follows a more of the Enochian type side of things, which
have you had him on your show as well?
Yes.
I've seen it.
Yes. So we did a show recently on Midgard Musings, or we did an episode on Midgard Musings recently about, brothers of differing faiths, or brothers of differing, paths or whatever. And him and I have shared in ritual together, and we have done things to secure our, familial bonds. And, but what you're talking about kind of dips into some of that type of stuff. So I'm a little bit familiar with it and kind of can relate in some sort of way.
And guys, do yourselves a favor. If you want to learn more about Odinism, Jesse has an excellent channel called Midgard Musings, where he does deep dive on different, like you do your Have 'em All, where you break down different text, stuff like that. It's very intricate and well worded. But yeah, I like the way you pick apart small things. You don't focus on the large picture. You'll take a small thing and blow it out.
Well, I do that mainly because in my growth as a heathen, and just for anyone that may be watching and curious, I don't label it as Odinism, and the main reason for that is just because of the connotations that particular title carries with it. There's usually a lot of right-wing, bigoted, racist, supremacy type stuff tied to Odinism, because that name and that title came out from like the prison system and pretty modern in terms. I understand that it's a term that's used to kind of summarize or identify what we're talking about with my specific spirituality approaches. Just to kind of like set that part straight for me, I am a Norse heathen. I'm a Germanic pagan, and it's not a globalized. You can't globalize it. It's
Mhm.
not like, and this is not a jab in a negative way to Christians or anything, because I have family and I come from a Christian background, but it's not a jab at where like Christianity tends to globalize
Mhm.
and make this, you know, brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God sort of thing. It's not a jab to say that you're whack for thinking it. And I'm not talking bad about Christians in any sort of way. The thing about it is, though, with Germanic heathenry, it is very regional, it is local, and it's tribal, and so it's small. You can't globalize it. So the approaches to things are very much on the smaller scale.
Yeah, it sounds. Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is these people, these racists and neo Nazis that adopt something sacred. It's sort of like, which I know you didn't want to step on any toes, but I will. I don't give a fuck. It's my
Well, I'll
problem with.
step on the toes of people that need their toes stepped on, like the
Yeah,
racists and the bigots and the
yeah.
white supremacists and people that think that they're owed, or that they are somehow entitled to venerate or worship Germanic gods just because of their ancestry. That's
Hmm.
BS, and that there's
Yeah,
on that in any sort of way. So I'll step on those toes all day long, man.
yeah. The toes I was going to step on particularly, I was going to talk about what is it called? Fair weather Christians, because that's what it sounds like to me. A lot of the problem
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with. I have a lot of qualms with Old Testament, but when it comes to the New Testament, I have zero problems with Christ. I agree with nearly everything he said. However, my problem with Christians is that I am not a Christian, but I generally know more about their book than they do when I talk to them about it. And it's like, how are you going to tell me that you're following Christ, following his footsteps? Because that's what it means to be a Christian. And it's this very name only, which is what it sounds like you're saying with these name only Odinists. That it's just like, oh, that's my heritage, that's where I come from, and it's like you ain't with the shit, you ain't
Yeah,
with it.
you're not jiving with it. You're not in it for the right reasons. You a lot of those types are trying to appropriate cultural heritage and making it to be that making them to be superior, or trying to portray themselves as superior because of it, and for some reason.
Yeah, it's dumb. Which we were talking about. I wanted to get back to this real quick. We were talking about cults, and like a major problem I have with cults is because Satan is the ideal that I worship, which is the light bringer. Um,
Mhm.
I despise cults that would hold some sort of information over the rest of society. I take even deeper qualm with a Satanist cult, because if you are about Satan and you're in a cult, you obviously don't understand what you're talking about. You're not.
It's an oxymoron, right?
Yeah, it's an oxymoron, exactly. So when you have things like the Illuminati, that's the shining one, that's illumination, that's Lucifer, they might say that they're with that, but that's totally contradictory to everything that Satan stood for. And it's not just Satan. Satan is a good allegory for what I'm talking about. What I'm really talking about is a student mentorship, um, which we see this repeated with Prometheus. Prometheus is the light bringer. He brings fire to man. Actually, this is another good segue. In the Havamal, we learn about Odin and how he impales himself on the Yggdrasil and he learns the runes and he brings that to man. And I was wondering, I see a lot of crossover with these stories where you have a god figure who brings hidden knowledge and bestows it upon people. I see the story repeated. I was just wondering what you thought about it.
Yeah. So the Havamal is an interesting thing, because I think for a lot of people who may be keying in on some of the interesting parts of this particular spiritual path, the Havamal tends to become something that is brought up a lot. The biggest thing that I can come up with is that the reason for why that is, uh, and it's usually due to some sort of baggage that people are carrying with them. like myself included, right? A lot of folks aren't raised or brought up in, pagan or heathen practices. They stumble upon it, they learn about it. Maybe they're getting some sort of call from their ancestors or something that draws them to want to delve into this approach. And the Havamal becomes something that's like, because then the reason why they hone in on it, or the reason why they look at it, is because it is a similar, or it has some equivalencies to it that reflect scripture or other sorts of sacred text. The thing with the way I look at it, right, is that yes, there's a lot of good pieces of advice in the Havamal. There's a lot of neat things that you can draw from that are just like basic good approaches to how to have society function well and operate like a well-oiled machine. It is not scripture. It is not commandments from the sacred, right? It's literally authored by a arguably Christian influence. There's a lot of Christian influence in the Havamal because of when it was published, when it was authored, say. But when it comes to like the mythology of it, right? The whole Odin receiving the knowledge of the runes and hanging from Yggdrasil, that gets into some of the more like the spirituality of it, and the understanding of like
I almost feel like it detracts from these stories to take them literal, whether that be Christianity or something from the Havamal. If you look at that and you think, oh, this literally happened, you're sort of missing the author's intent, which is another problem I have with a lot of Christians.
Yeah, and heathenry, paganism, we're polytheists.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are some folks hard polytheists, soft polytheists? Do you really think that the gods exist, or are they metaphors for other things? That is a question that you'll never get a heathen to, like, you put 10 pagans in the room, and ask them the same question, you'll probably get 10 different responses in terms of how they approach it and how we look at it. So it's really just an individual approach, or if it becomes something that is a tribal view of things, you get a lot of people that view it the same way or similar ways. You can argue it that it's a tribal view on things. But I personally, I look at the gods as they exist. I'm probably a hard polytheist by definition, right? So do I think that they're sealed to learn the runes? Yeah, kind of in a way I do. What it means and what the lesson I take away from it is a little bit deeper than that, though.
Mm-hmm. It's almost when I think about that kind of stuff, I think asking that question is just irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
like
it really it really doesn't.
Like, it doesn't change what you learn from it, Like
it's your own individual, like, I'll call it individual cultic practices. I'll call it UPG, unverified personal gnosis. Anything that you experience or that you encounter yourself that's just kind of that happens to you. It happened to you. Who's anybody else? Who can challenge that? Who is anybody to challenge what happened to you or me or whatever? But I'm not going to be the one that passes those sort of things off as, well, this is how our ancestors did it. This is historical. No, it's not. There's a whole different dynamic there. So
that's what you're saying about the personal aspect of it, which you were talking to your friend on your show about ritual, and he was talking about how he doesn't film it. There's no recording whatsoever because there's which I thought really don't need to be doors. He said there don't need to be doors into that place. That's a private thing. Which
cracks in the wall.
Yeah, it's defeating the purpose to do that. So something when I turned 18 and I left the religion I was in and I moved out and got on my own, I got really into the occult, but just as an aesthetic. I thought I was the edgy Hot Topic kid. I just thought it looked cool, like Tim Burton, all that shit.
Yeah.
But I didn't take it seriously. And then me and the girl I was dating at the time got a Ouija board, and I didn't expect anything from it. I was a borderline atheist at that point, but I had some very, very profound experiences, which we could get into. But
sure.
That's like but I had to realize, it's like, of course, my immediate reaction was like, I have to tell everyone about this. I got to try this and show everyone this thing, you know? And
Was it done? Was your intent to try to prove something though?
um,
Like I got to show them that this is what,
depends which,
because to like validate it or prove it.
oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was like a science, trying to put science behind it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like understanding, like, I was trying to decipher. I was like, because you touched on something that really resonated with me. I was trying to figure out if what I was speaking to and what was possessing me physically was an aspect of myself or something exterior. And I started performing experiments to try and definitively say whether that was something exterior or interior. And then in my research, I learned about chaos magic and the two paths in chaos magic, the left hand and the right hand. Right hand is about power does not come from me; it comes from a higher source, and it's channeled through me. And then left hand path is I create that power and I manifest outwards. And either way is a proper way of looking at it. Both achieve the same results. And something I had to understand is like I can't, if someone tells me it's like, oh man, I don't feel comfortable using Ouija board, especially after you tell me you were bodily possessed. It's like, and I can try and tell them, no, as long as you remain in control and you give yourself confidence, everything will be fine. I had to realize that's me. That's my path. I'm a left-hand magician. It's my will. And so that works for me. But it took me a long time to understand that what works for me does not work for everyone.
Your hall, your call.
Yeah, man. Everyone's got their own voyage in this life.
Yep. If anybody that watches this and watches my content and knows anything about Eric Shervin, that is his kind of like, it's a moniker, right? Not my hall, not my call.
Mm.
Him and I are similar in a lot of ways. We share our knowledge, or we share what we know, but by no means are we the final authority on anything. Your hall, your call. If it's within your wheelhouse, you can sort of dictate and control a little bit of what's going on. If it's outside of that and it's somebody else, that's their wheelhouse and their hall, their call. So
yeah, that's a mantra to live by for sure.
Yeah.
I think
I like it.
there's last week I had a friend of mine on the podcast, and he laid out this illustration for me, and it's something he had just thought of, which I thought was beautiful. And he was talking about how he's like, okay, just imagine, which he didn't give me any context. He just said, imagine that there's a baby and it goes into a cave, and the cave is full of snakes, and it's in there for a day, and it comes out as an old man. But then that old man converts himself back into the form of a baby and goes out and looks for new snake caves to explore. And without him having to explain it to me, I got what he was trying to get across from that. You have to humble yourself. There's a process of unlearning where it's like, if you learn to be angry and learn hatred, or you're in a cult and you learn all this stuff that just turns out to not be true or useful, then you have to unlearn that. And it's better to have that child mind where you can learn than to be jaded and dogmatic, like you were saying.
Dogmatic, yeah.
Yeah. People get stuck in their ways, and it's like, none of us know shit at the end of the day. We're all just bumbling around.
I'm a student, and I'm always going to be a student, and I've tried to portray that in what I do, that gets seen by the public, right? I'm not out here telling you that this is how you should do it. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you this is how I've learned to do certain things, and that's benefited me. Maybe it'll benefit you. Maybe it'll give you some ideas or inspiration. But by all means, carve your own path, weave your own webs, and your hall, your call. Make it, figure out what works for you. It's not going to be the same that works for me necessarily or anybody else, and that's okay in a lot of aspects.
Mm-hmm. Philip, do you mind laying out for Jessie that Odin story you had? Because it's really interesting, and I would, but I don't want to butcher it.
Oh yeah, no problem. So I was getting checked into a mental institution due to some things that happened. And I was getting like vitals done, and there was this man walking around, and I was kind of bothered by him, just because I was nervous anyways. Um, and I was like, "What's up with that guy?" to the nurse, and she was like, "Oh, don't worry about him. He just wanders around." And so eventually, he comes up to me and he starts talking to me, and he's like, "Where are you from?" And I tell him where I'm from, and he's like, "Oh, do you know Lowe's Drive, right down by where the Kroger is?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I worked at that Kroger." And he was like, "One day I was walking down that street and I saw some Japanese guys and they were talking Jap." And he was like, "I went up to him and I just started talking Japanese to him. And we talked in Japanese and we laughed and we had a good time. And then I just went on my way and they went on their way." And as he's telling me this, my whole body just was filled with chills, because not even 2 weeks earlier, I had had a dream where I had done the exact same thing. And it was so strange. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And then I just put it behind me. And then, so this man, physically, he was older, maybe 50s, 60s. Uh, and he was thin, but he was blind in one eye, which kind of stuck out to me. Uh, and he was most of the time really nice. He was a pretty intelligent person. I mean, for the most part, he was a little wacko, but when he did have his moments of clarity, he was, he could hold a conversation and, talk to you just about almost anything. And he was super nice. And, but he did have a temper. He had just a lot of little things stuck out to me about his personality and about the way he looked and the way he carried himself, that it really, it just in my head, just Odin flashed over and over again. I was just like, this reminds me of him. And at the time,
I can see why.
I was taking a dive into that sort of area. I was coming out of the Christianity thing myself, and I wasn't forcing the direction. I wasn't trying to force anything. I was just letting whatever influenced me, wherever I was pulled, that's what I was going to get into, and I was going to check it out. And I watched a TV show that piqued my interest in the Norse gods a little more. So I started looking into them, and then I had my girlfriend at the time had taught me how to use pendulums, and so I had tried, communicating with some gods that, some of the Norse gods that way, and just fooled around a little bit. And then I had a dream where I was with Odin and Balder. Actually, I was in a forest when I had fallen asleep. I woke up in this forest, and it was dark, and I could see the moon, but the moon wasn't giving off any light. It was just like this white circle in the sky, but it was pitch black in this forest almost. And I was walking through forest, and just barely being able to get around these trees. And then I get to a section where there's just, this orange glow, and I follow it, and it's a campfire. And you know, I see men sitting around, so I go and I sit, and you know, they introduced themselves as Odin and Balder, and we just talked about what I had gone through growing up as a child, you know, childhood trauma and things, and how it had scarred me and how it had affected me, and, you know, the direction that I was going to go in, you know, with my life after that. Uh, and that was a real big thing for me because I had never had any sort of visions or dreams like that.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that guy definitely seemed like a peephole to me. Like I had this guy on the podcast 2 weeks ago who is blowing my mind with little language things, and one of the things he was saying is people are peepholes for entities to look into this world through, and that's I think that's true of at least artists. Um, I don't think any real art. People talk about, you know, divinely inspired text like the Bible. I think all of the text, all of the art, it doesn't come from us. It comes from something higher, and
Yeah.
all the true
Yeah.
art anyway.
Yep.
So, Phil, you were telling a story before we went to break. Do you want to wrap that up?
Sure. So, really, this next part is kind of just not.
It's
so
still
much,
interesting though.
It's yeah. It's So we sat down, and while I was in the mental institution, I was having a real rough time because, you know, I looked at myself as fairly normal, and now I was surrounded by all these people that had, you know, some real mental issues, you know, and I felt, you know, I was just nervous. I'd never been in that sort of situation before, and, you know, I was being given all these meds and stuff, and it was really stressing me out. And so, you know, I took to meditating, and there's a quiet room. They'd make everybody get up in the morning, and then if you wanted to, you know, still have a little bit of quiet time, there was a dark room you could go in and either nap or, you know, just hang out. And so I would go into this quiet room, and I would sit in the corner and I would meditate. And he was the first one to come up to me, and you know, he sat down next to me and asked what I was doing. And, you know, so I told him, and I basically taught him how to meditate, you know, and I would sit down and I would do that with him in the mornings and throughout the day. And then eventually I actually got a couple of other people to sit down uh, with me too, and do that. And it was a really good, it was a really good experience, just all in all.
Yeah, like I think, I don't know. Whenever you describe it, it just it reinforces that idea that I've been thinking that like people, I mean, people channel different spirits and ideas like through them. Like we're just receivers for information, um, which like that's kind of another thing I wanted to talk to you guys about anyway. Um, why do you? Okay, so Jesse, we talked about um, the spiritual aspect of certain texts, like the poetry within Have 'Em All, and like there's obviously a lot of good stuff you can glean from that. But do you have any ideas? Which I think everyone has an idea, but none of us know, obviously. But do you have any intuitions or ideas about our actual history, like where we come from physically?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a big question.
Yeah, no one knows.
Where we come from physically, right?
Yeah.
Um, I did just want to like kind of ride off the coattails of Phil's story because I think it's significant
Yeah, go ahead.
that he kind of felt that it was Odin specifically. Why Odin specifically, right? You could ask the question, well, why, right? You're in a mental institute. You're going through so many things mentally, and then like why that particular figure? I think it's significant just hearing his story, um, and the description. Obviously, some of the like physical elements of this character who you encountered, you know, the missing eye, kind of old. But I think it's significant in a way that this all happened in an environment there where there was a lot of, you know, mental duress, right? You could argue the fact that, you know, it's an isolated area where people are feeling various levels of mental anguish, right? Various levels of mental illness, which is certainly a thing. The reason why I think it's that Odin comes up, right, is because of in the lore, Odin has two ravens
Mm-hmm.
that are very closely attested to him, Hugin and Munin. So Hugin and Munin are two ravens in the
That's
lore,
thought in mind, right?
thought and memory, right?
Yeah.
Which are aspects of our mental self. And Odin, in one of the poems, fears for the loss of Hugin, which is thought, but he fears more for the loss of Munin, which is memory. He fears more for the fact that memory will not return. And I feel that there's some sort of what you want to. I've done a video about this on my channel, Hugin, Munin, thought and memory, and what kind of magic, we could call it magic, what kind of magic there is in memory, because we give life to things, and we bring life to things that are sort of recessed in our subconscious. And memory is such an important thing that when we lose that, if we don't have it, what do we have? You know, it's such a tragic thing to lose memory. We have, you know, dementia, Alzheimer's, these sorts of illnesses that affect certain folks that basically wipe that slate clean.
Yeah.
And it's like the loss of that magic. And Odin specifically is a god figure in the lore, at least, that is attested to so many things, magic being one of them. Phil, you had mentioned that, you know, this person who you encountered was very knowledgeable, very literate, was able to speak in languages,
And also off his fucking rocker at the same time.
Yeah, off the rocker, and that is a thing that is attested to Odin in the lore, right?
Yeah.
He is the mad one. Madness is a thing.
And there's great brilliance in that.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's everything that you're talking about. As I was listening to the story, I was like, Odin,
Yeah.
Odin. You know,
Right.
so many various elements that just, for me as a Norse heathen or Germanic pagan, whatever you want to label it, just really like struck a chord.
That's cool.
But I didn't want to. So Alex, you had asked a specific question. I may have gone off a little bit on it, but I just want to bring that up.
I think what
to
I
the
was
whole
saying
thing,
was actually more off subject. I'm glad you did that. Yeah, I was going to ask you guys, both of you, about literal origins. As like you can find such good content and invaluable information within any of these religions or philosophies, within Buddhism, Christianity. But when we talk about what literally happened,
like where we came from, this whole thing.
Yeah. Which I think I lean towards, personally, I lean towards Sumerian text, just because that's the oldest thing we have. Which ironically, the Epic of Gilgamesh is a history of our origin, and it's the oldest living document. So that's where I lean, and that's, you know, that gets into Anunnaki and alien crossbreeding.
Right.
Terrence McKenna also talks about he has a thing called the stoned ape theory, and it's early primates taking psychedelic mushrooms and gaining sapience from it. I think either of those ideas are valid, but there seems to be some kind of alien interference.
It's quite entirely possible. You know, for me, in the spirituality that I kind of adopted, you know, there was this the Norse view of the creation theory, if you want to call it that. Where did mankind originate from. You know, there's a lot of primordial elements that existed during or before the existence of what we know of as the world or as Earth, or for Norse pagans is Midgard, Middle
Mhm.
Earth, the realm in which we exist. Right. So it all kind of came about due to the element of fire and ice
Mhm.
clashing. A lot of the theme that ones or individuals see into Norse heathenry is this clash between order and chaos, this sort of ongoing seeking between these primordial elements. But the creation theory, to like just delve into that. So in Norse, Germanic, heathenry, paganism, Norse heathenry, Germanic paganism, you know, we have this existence of the original man and woman figures, Osk and Emla, which are Old Norse words for ash and elm. These were the original man and woman, right? The first human mankind figures that exist in the lore. And the way the lore goes is that these were created from, you know, the elements, but Odin and his brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, were the three figures that gave life to Osk and Embla. They gave life in so many different ways. Odin imparted certain cognitive abilities. Vili and Ve, they each imparted their own, like, beyond the physical, right? The physical existed, but there were the cognitive abilities, the reasoning, all these various things that exist in the subconscious, but that resonate beyond just who you are as a physical shell of an individual.
Mhm.
So Odin gave certain gifts. Vili and Ve, who are the brothers of Odin, imparted certain gifts. So there's cognitive abilities, there's wisdom, there's so many different things that you could just research yourselves in terms of that aspect of it. So in terms of like where we come from as an individual, or where we come from as humanity, for a lot of Norse pagans, right? Like we look at that as like the creation theory, or the creation part of it. But like for me, like I came from the union of my mother and father,
Okay,
and
fair
they
enough.
came from the
Yeah,
union of their mother and father, and we exist because people hooked up.
right.
But ultimately, when it comes to like the metaphysics or the spirituality of it, mankind, humans, as it were, were brought about due to the efforts of the divine.
Mm. Yeah, and that's something we see across time and across cultures,
Yeah.
with different iterations. I think I really find that interesting that like Aleister Crowley had a really interesting take on. Um, he might have been the one that coined the term. I'm not sure. He talks about a concept called aeons, which is another word for an era.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he breaks it down like there's the age of Osiris, and that was, we'll say, this is not going to be completely accurate, but we'll say like 2000 BC prior, like that time. If you look at the religions of that time, I mean, it was just it's just a giant orgy. Everyone's just
It was a
copulating,
melting
and
pot.
yeah, and no
Yeah.
one's thinking about where babies come from in the sense of like like the coming from the seed. Everyone, so women are just like these magical creatures in that society that produce babies. They
Women are
and
magical creatures. Let me just
fair
say for
enough.
the record. Let me just say for the record that I don't care what culture you come from. Women are magical. Women
Yeah,
are magical creatures. There's enough various cultures that could back that up in the view of how women were perceived in society.
that's a religion I can get
Especially
behind.
yeah, especially in some of your like proto, like anything that predates recorded Christianity.
Yes, that's what I was getting into. Is if it's especially that era because of like, I mean, women are just popping babies out, and then, once your mom feeds you and takes care of you, like literally from her own body, and then you're weaned. So then your new mother becomes Earth, and then we get Mother Gaia. So it's also an Earth religion. It's mother centric and
Yes.
feminine centric and Earth centric. And then we move into an era where people start to understand birth a little better, and they understand the process. And then all of a sudden you see um, like like you see a sharp change, which I'm sure it didn't happen so sharply as like looking back on it. Like, for example, I'm going to get into this in a minute, but we're in a transition of eras right now, and it's not always super obvious. Sometimes it's more one way or the other way. But there was a transition into the age of that was the age of Isis, the feminine. Age of Osiris is the masculine, and it's characterized masculine deities, and it's centered around the sun because the sun provides nutrients to the earth in order for it to, you know, um,
Right.
and then so then we get into, the sun rises in the morning, and then it sets, and then it's reborn the next morning. So we have this cycle of dying and reincarnation or rebirth, the resurrection of a literal sun, you know.
Mhm. Yep.
And, because if you understand birth, the next big question is what happens when we die? If we understand a little bit where we come from, the next big question is what happens when we die? And if you don't understand astrology, the big question is where does the sun go at night? And is it going to come back tomorrow?
So that's an interesting element, because so much of what we know, which is a constant learning process when it comes to like my own spirituality with Germanic paganism and things, it was we see a lot of similarities with that. The rebirth, the cyclic events. In Germanic heathenry, there's, I think, pretty much almost anybody nowadays is familiar with the term Ragnarok.
Mm.
It's a cyclic event.
Mm.
There's a need for death, but death is
Mm.
not an end. Death
Mm.
is the next step to the journey.
Mm.
And the complex that exists in Norse heathenry, at least for me, with what happens after we die, is exactly that. It's very complex, because it's not an end. It's a continuation of existence, and there's elements to ourselves that don't go away. It's
Yeah.
not an end. It's a continuation of existence,
Mm.
and it's seen throughout multiple cultures, but it does exist in Germanic culture. There's a really good source for this to kind of just bring into context for the Scandinavian view of life after death or the afterlife and stuff, because so many of what people just tend to grab a hold of, especially newbies coming into this particular path for like Norse heathenry, Germanic paganism, is this whole like Valhalla, a glorious afterlife of you know battle wonderment, this sort of thing. There's a really good book, and I am kind of drawing a blank on the author right now, but it's The Road to Hell.
Mm.
And hell is spelled with one L, not hell like the
Mm.
Christian place of
Oh,
torment or the grave,
okay.
as it were, but it's the road to hell, because hell, Hel, is a figure in Norse, at least during or after the conversion period of Scandinavia, that sort of presides over the afterlife, the underworld, as it were. But the road to hell has a lot of is a book that has a lot of useful historical views of just kind of how, like, funerary rites, the view of the afterlife, how the society at the time kind of adopted or looked at life after death. It's very, very useful. I would recommend it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Um, yeah, I think so. There's this is sort of in the same vein of what you're talking about. Um, I've noticed a pattern. Uh, who have taken psychedelics, LSD, mushrooms, etc., where you reach, and this seems to carry across substance also. I've noticed a trend, and I've experienced this myself as well, where people come to a level where they realize that there is only one consciousness and it's split itself into many in order to learn and experience things. And for me personally, that's an uncomfortable thought because I like being myself. That's, the ego talking. It's like, I don't, everything is fine in the end. We all return to this group consciousness, but at the same time, that's an uncomfortable thought for me because I like the individuality of it.
Yeah. Well, the self can be, the self is complex.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelics and things like that give you a altered sense of awareness, an altered sense of self, are incorporated in various cultures.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So
sure.
what reality is, what we perceive as reality in our, day-to-day life, can quite often be at least in my own experience, it's not always what it seems. Things aren't always what they seem. And those psychedelics can, when used properly or when used safely, can help us or help a lot of folks kind of tap into that subconscious, that part of the self that doesn't always make itself so manifest. That's still an existing part of ourselves, but that's recessive.
Yes. Yeah. That's like
kind of brings it to light, kind of gives it that life.
In a way. It's almost just like euphoria, like a feeling.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a thing called the Akashic Record, which is it's supposedly like just a library of all information, past, present, future, known and unknown. It's that could be tapped into. There's Kalindi Lee, YouTuber from Africa, takes enormous doses of mushrooms, talking 30 grams to 50 gram range, just absurd amounts of mushrooms, unreasonable.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So he I guess he's just fucking just like but like he talks about you get to a certain point where he's like, you ever look at a magic carpet, like Aladdin? It's like those Arabian carpets are actually magical. They're labyrinths. And when you take a certain threshold of psilocybin and you look at these things, it's a location, and you can sort of tap into this. It's a doorway into a unbridled, unrestricted knowledge. And it can be, you can go through that library and download specific things back. So I don't have any experience in that myself, but he's an interesting guy for sure.
I think there's a place for it within my view, but it's a very niche and focused approach, right? I don't think that just everybody and anybody should be delving into this sort of thing. This kind of, for me, with my spirituality, kind of enters the realm of those who are focused specifically for that purpose. Talking about the magicians, the shamans, those types of folks who are connected to the sacred realms in that sort of way. And it's not, it's a specialty. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't go to an electrician for a plumbing problem.
Dude, I love that. I love that analogy. That is so true. Because and that's what I'm talking about Yggdrasil and Odin. he impales himself on the tree so you don't have to. Which I was reading about something, which I thought it was interesting because I wanted to brush up on Havamal before I talked to you. So I did a little just light reading for the show, and it was a breakdown of whatever poem within the Havamal that is, where Odin impales himself on the tree. It's talking about the wording is he sacrifices himself to himself, and it's talking about how this could be an allegory for a man channeling Odin. This could be, like it's not it was talking about how what greater offering to a god can there be than himself. So and that also got me thinking. You talked about how there's roots in Christianity as well. That got me thinking about the Father sending his Son down in order to suffer and die.
Sure.
But yeah, you're talking about shamans and psychedelics. How what a shaman is, and I've been thinking about what a modern shaman would look like. Because what a shaman is that it's the old wise man in the village that has seen some shit and can impart knowledge on the younger generation. So a shaman today looks like you. It looks like me. It looks like Joe Rogan, someone who is taking the time, but also humble about it. The thing about a shaman is you can learn something from them, but like you said, it's also a student, and that's the part that's important. It's a process of learning that doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a very specialized field.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that I think, in my own personal views, is something that can be faked.
Yeah.
Or there's no Charlemagne, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no like smoke and mirrors to it. It's when you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that title, that position, carries with it a lot of weight.
Right. If you call
Carries with
yourself
it.
a shaman, you're sort of not it.
You're
It's
yeah.
something someone else puts on you.
It is 100% something that others have called you as such. I
Right.
myself would not call myself a shaman. I myself work with runes for various, esoteric or divinatory purposes, and have been identified at large as a Vitki. And this is a term, this is a title, this is a label, if you want to call it, that isn't something that I'd be like, yep, I've studied runes for 6 months and I've graduated the academy, blah blah blah. I'm now a Vitki. No titles, things of that nature for me are given. So we're talking about names, worth, things that give worth to who you are. So a worth name, a title, as it were. These are things that other people, whether it be a community or your smaller collective, your tribe, whatever it may be, like Alex, Jesse, Phil, whoever is the guy to do this thing. He is the one. He is the shaman. He is the Vitki. He is the worker of magic, whatever. And the collective agrees.
Yeah.
There is power in that. It's eminent, and there is power in that sort of naming, right? When you name something, right?
Yes.
There's power in the naming of it because it gives life to that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And we're talking about runes and how, I mean, that's the same thing. It's which it's not just an alphabet. It's not just a way of saying things. It's an understanding of the universe through symbols. And
yeah, can be.
Yeah. Or yeah, I mean, I guess it's a way of looking at it. It's both. It's also a language or a set of symbols.
And at its core, right? Like it's
Yeah.
Runic alphabets have kind of evolved over time, depending on where you were in history. What language was being spoken, how the spoken language was transliterated into a written language. The runic alphabet has changed and evolved over time.
Yeah.
Various cultures. Yeah.
That's like I have like one of my favorite quotes is from Alan Moore. He's the mind behind Watchmen. It's a DC Comics comic series.
Right.
And Batman Killing Joke. He's wrote a lot of famous comics. And one of his favorite quotes is, or one of my favorite quotes of his, is that the language about magic is more about language than it is about magic. And that just rings so true to me because the two are so synonymous. It's like the minute we start talking about magic, we noted, like I've noticed this with my friends, we get in these loops of semantics. So it's like, well, what do you mean when you say magic? What is
Yeah.
yeah, the language
It's
gets
not
confused.
a universal term. It's not a globalized term. I mean, there's
Yeah.
magic in spoken word. There's magic in memory. There's magic in so many things.
Yep.
So it's all relative and it's all
Yeah.
subjective, I think, to the individual view of it. But there's magic in so many things. So how do you define it? Can you define it?
The
I
In
think-
world
sort
is
of way.
magic.
What's that?
The world is magic. Everything
Yeah.
is magic. Therefore, everything you do is some sort of, expression of that.
For sure.
And
There's magic in poetry.
yeah,
The weaving of words, how
Mhm.
people absorb. There's magic in your story, Phil, about your encounter in that institution. Like there's magic in that. You're weaving a story. You're telling something that's.
And there's magic in what we're doing right now as well.
Yeah.
Because we're making an attempt to learn and in the process of learning, we might be able to teach by incident, but that's what it's about, is pursuing knowledge yourself. Yeah. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I was going to ask you, which if you don't want to talk about it, because it's totally understandable. It's like a personal thing, but do you have any paranormal stories? I hesitate to say ghost stories, but I think you catch the drift of what I'm saying.
I could give an example of something along those lines. Yes.
Okay. I mean, and I don't want to press you because I know when it gets to this subject, it's a very personal thing.
I've shared what I'm thinking of enough on public platforms, and I'm comfortable with sharing this particular thing.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to, we got about like 3 minutes left in the Zoom meeting. So if you want to give that to us, and then we can wrap it up.
Yeah. So it relates to the runes specifically. So.
Oh, wow.
Newly into my approach to heathenry, I was not want or desired to delve into the runes, because again I felt that it was a specialized field of that sort of thing, but I had an interest in it. And there was one night that I don't know what time of night it was. I don't remember exactly that. I don't remember looking at my clock, but I was awoken out of a deep sleep to the point where it jarred me out of the sleep so much that I sat up straight in my bed. And what woke me up was what you could relate to, like the sound of wood cracking, like a just like a clap. And then I heard the name of a rune being chanted. And I saw the image of this rune being projected. Of course, the room was dark, and I saw the image of this rune being projected in my mind's eye. And the rune that was cast in front of my mind's eye was Othala, which is a rune of ancestry, a rune of connecting to your ancestors, a rune of familial ties, inheritance, that sort of thing. And that was kind of like an awakening moment for me to realize that it's time.
You got a very clear, direct sign.
It was so direct that it woke me out of this. Yeah, it woke me out of a deep sleep. And at that point, I knew, all right, I'm gonna hang from the tree, as it were. I'm going to learn the runes myself.
That's such a crazy story, man. I'm glad I asked you about it. A minute ago, you were telling me about a dream you had that woke you out. You woke up from it because it was such a powerful message. I mean, when people talk about getting a message from the God, that's like it couldn't be any more clear or direct, right? That's
Yeah,
like, which is not. That's another neat thing about the runes in general is that it's a conceptualized little piece of construct in the form of yeah.
yeah. So like, it's an interesting thing as I've kind of grown in my heathenry, right, and focused my approach to certain elements that may not have a whole lot of historical backing to it, but that are useful in modern times. Um, like the concept or the understanding that words, and it doesn't matter if it's a letter or if it's the spoken word. Um, I was woken out deeply
Mm-hmm.
by a rune, which by its just inherent or yeah, at its base understanding was a letter, and that represented a certain thing. There's magic in word. There's magic in spoken word, whether we talk about poetry, song, um, any sort of thing like that. There's magic in that, and the meaning behind this rune that kind of woke me out of a deep sleep and that gave me some sort of realization of focus on this. Right, that is a personal thing to me that I've shared across my platforms before multiple times, just to give people the sense of like, you know what, if this happens to you, if this is something that happens to you, it's like you don't have to read too much into it in terms of like, well, is this how my ancestors interpreted things,
Mm-hmm.
or is this how you know in ancient arch heathen times it was looked like? Who knows? Because we don't know. Ultimately, we
Yeah.
don't know because let's get facts straight, right? The Germanic peoples were illiterate and they didn't document things very good.
Mm-hmm.
They relied on people like Tacitus and Maury Sturluson, and people who were more educated to like recall certain things and document certain things. So was there any divination? Was there any importance to the runes for divinatory purposes? We don't necessarily
Oh
know that,
wow.
and it's not recorded in historical texts. However,
Wow.
however, however, spoken word, poetry, things like that.
Mm.
What kind of magic are we weaving through those things? The runes themselves were at the base level, um, an alphabet,
Mm.
things that were used, but the to speak, to write in. There's magic in that. The divinatory purposes behind those symbols, um, things, and we're on in rune poems, whether it be the Norwegian rune poems and the Icelandic rune poems, the Anglo-Saxon rune poems, things that everyone can read. Symbols meant or represent, I should say, certain things. But the way I see it right now, and at least in modern times, is like we have all that we have those rune poems documented, but what are we doing now in modern times? In a way, create our own rune poems,
Mm.
give some sort of life to what they mean to us. How are we
Mm.
bringing life to those things? Because Odin, in the Havamal and in the lore, right, gave himself to himself, sacrificed himself to himself to gain knowledge of these symbols, these
Yeah.
emblems, what you want to call it. What do we give of ourselves now to learn these things, and how do we invest in ourselves to kind of further that approach
Yeah.
for magical or divinatory purposes? It's organic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very organic, and it's uh, any divination.
Yes. That's yeah. So I mean, first of all, yes, I totally agree with you. But I want to go back a second. You said that there's no evidence to support for divination. When did it become a thing then? Like that was a thing at a certain point. Like what? When did was that adopted in?
Yeah. So I mean, when you talk about runes specifically used for divination, that's very modern. When I say
Okay.
modern, I mean I'm like within the last century or so,
Oh, wow.
within the
Okay.
last 20 to 21st century. Now there are certain elder texts that kind of allude to the fact that there was symbols and things scribed onto sticks. Tacitus, Tacitus Germania talks about the Roman legions at the time observing Germanic tribe culture. There was, and again, it's very in their like documented sources that there was lots being casted. There were things being done on sticks. That
Okay.
were they runes? We don't necessarily know, but I guess it's assumed
We know
largely
there's
that they
some
were
kind of
runes.
archaic divination, is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
some sort of archaic divination. You also have some Icelandic sagas that reference the use of runes for magical purposes. The saga of Egil Skallagrimsson is an Icelandic saga wherein it is specifically admonished or warned against the misuse of runes, because there was a account in this specific saga of the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson that runes were scribed incorrectly, and the result of how the runes were scribed resulted in something bad, and somebody had to go in and like basically correct it. And so it's admonished or warned against like don't
You don't know what you're fucking with.
don't use the runes unless you know what you're doing. And in the
Yeah.
Havamal, which we talked about earlier, there's a stanza that says various things. Do you know how to write them? Do you know how to paint them? Do you know how to blood them? Do you know how to stain them? Do you know how to various things when it comes to the runes? And it's in the Runetal section of the Havamal. Now, how that is transliterated or how that's understood in modern times could be open to interpretation. But for me, it's like, don't mess with the runes. Don't get into that sort of thing unless you know their meanings, their purpose, how to sort of weave those threads. Because what you're doing is you are inserting yourself into the overall threads of
Okay.
what like we as Norse heathens refer to as weird. It's kind of like almost like fate, right? Like there's certain things that are woven in time, like you are born at a certain time and you die at a certain time, and then everything else in between is.
And the application of runes is another one of those concreting things for you, or for an individual.
I wouldn't say necessarily concreting, but it is an element that can be used to manipulate weird,
Okay.
manipulate the concept of what is happening between
Okay.
life as birth and the end of physical life as death. Everything that's in between those points is woven by us. We are the weavers of our own fate.
It's like it sounds to me like programming language. It's like you wouldn't use your admin tools unless you were going to go in and start changing, features. You would just
Right.
use the operation normally unless you knew how to use developer tools. You could really fuck the shit up on your computer.
Why would you even want to change it?
Right.
There has to be a specific purpose.
Yeah. If you just
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be something beyond just fucking with it. You got to go in with purpose. That makes complete sense to me. And there's something else I want to talk to you about, and that's a perfect segue. Called an egregore, and there's also servitors, and it might be exclusively a chaos magic concept. I'm not so sure about that, but I know it. There are texts like Liber Null and Psychonaut that really break it down simple. But the idea is, if you have an imaginary friend, that thing takes on a life of its own at a certain point, and it's not really clear at what point. it might just be that the imagination is a separate dimension and it actually exists. What we think of as imaginary, you could say it is actually somewhere. It's just not here. And I think an egregore is an imaginary friend that you give devotion and worship to. It's you so I mean, and the thing is, I think people have been doing this for thousands of years. I think they've been looking up at the sun and saying, oh, there must be some rhyme or reason to all of this, and then they develop there. Maybe there's a guy hiding behind that cloud, and well, this is my sky thing, and that gives me some closure. Well, that thing is alive now, and it becomes something especially crazy when it's a collaborative effort. Like if you and I decided to together make an imaginary friend, and like that thing would take on aspects of me and it would take on aspects of you. So it's not truly either of us, but it's of us. And servitor is the concept, except it's a servant class. It's not God class. It's just an imaginary friend that works for you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of there's some nuances within my spirituality that to at least for me. So, you know, when it comes to the gods, the definitive barrier for me between the sacred and the profane. However, spiritual realm that exists within the profane space, I can work closely with that have a more kind of in tuned tie with me because I exist. They can kind of like they can shift between realms, as it were. It's kind of how I look at it. I'm talking about things that are specifically like not necessarily the gods, like upper echelon, like that exist exclusively in the sacred. Local land wights, local land spirits, things that exist that are still spiritual, that kind of exist with me in the profane. Localized, we could call them gods or localized spirits.
Yeah.
Things that or beings that I share existence with that can somewhat impact or influence how life for me, immortal and profane, kind of go. So I try to establish a relationship with some of them. The relationship can be mutual, depending on which of the spirits. They can also be like, I am of this area, and you are now along.
Right.
Sort of establish those boundaries. You have to establish those barriers. So there's some, you know, there's some like I like to call it woo-woo type stuff. You know, like there's some that transcend various cultures. But for me, it's like in my area, like I have localized house spirits, right? Husvatir, as I call them.
I saw your video on that. Yeah.
That kind of embody their existence in various ways. And then I have the extended Landvatir, the spirits of the land that because I exist in this plot of land that I'm sharing existence with, and we kind of have just this sort of like mutual, it's not a working relation that I have my house, my spirit. There's a lot in space for me.
It's kind of like what you were talking about earlier about clans and tribes. How
it kind of goes into that element, but we're dealing with spiritual beings, right? The tribal element for me is tied largely to the who I deal with.
Yeah.
The spiritual elements, the things that I can't tangibly like Like if I was sitting in the same room with Alex right now, I could say, this is Alex and I am Jessie.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's tangible. There are
I get
other
what you're
things
saying.
that exist in the profane that are not tangible. Like I can't put
Mhm.
my hand on the fact like my husvatir is here or they're this, that, or the other. Like there's some of those things that are not tangible in the way
It
that you
might be a whisper in the wind. It might be a mindset that you experience. It's
it,
not a person sitting in the room with you necessarily.
yeah, it might be the fact that, you know, a stationary object moves on its own or
Mm,
something along those lines, you know, just that sort of representation of the existence of a being that exists in both the profane and sacred spaces. They have that ability to transcend both spaces, and it's getting into some stuff that may just like blow
it's
some
mind
people's
fuck.
minds.
Yeah.
But it is the space that I live in, and it is the
Hmm.
space that I coexist with
I'm
because
picking
we
up
are
what you're
we
putting
are
down.
spiritual beings. You know what I mean? We
Yeah.
are beyond this mortal shell. There are
Hmm.
parts of us that exist and will exist beyond this physical shell's expiration date.
Yeah.
So we kind of have that part of self that can do these sort of things. It's just how much do
Hmm.
we want to invest into, I guess, seeing it through,
Yeah.
or being able to retain connection.
This is why I like chaos magic, because it's throwing theory out the window. It's saying this shit is so above my head, I'm not going to try and understand it. I'm just going to see what I can applicably do with my life. It's applicable magic. It's what can I'm not going to try and understand the tools I have. I'm just going to utilize them. So it's throwing like I really like it because in chaos magic there's the two branching paths. There's the right hand and the left hand, which we talked about earlier. But one would say these land spirits that you're encountering, they or even the ones within your own house, they're the right hand path would say that's a foreign thing. The left hand path would say, well, nothing really exists except me. I'm solipsistic. I'm
Yeah.
generating my world around me. So these things that I'm talking to are aspects of myself. And either way works for any kind of applicable meaning. Like for instance, if you're going to talk to one of these things, it makes little difference whether that thing is you or something else, you know?
So you talk about chaos magic, and I think Phil, um, whether it was in his talk earlier or what, you know, for me, like chaos is focused on a specific class of the sacred. We're talking about the
Mm,
gods. We're talking about um, for Norse heathens, this is a term that is pretty familiar. The Jotun, the
mm,
giants, right? So these are elements that, at least in modern times, we recognize as agents of chaos. We're talking
mm-hmm,
about figures like Loki. We're talking about figure Fenrir, uh, uh, under these various names in the lore that are agents of chaos because they are against the establishment of order. And
right.
that's one of the important things that we about earlier in the call was tribal heathenry, right? Tribal heathenry is the semblance of order. We
Mm,
we are reflecting or in a way trying to sort of um, mirror the existence of the sacred, the god, a seer. There's order, there's structure, there is a place for everyone and everything. The Jotun are the agents, as it were, the elements of chaos. Now there is place in a lot of folks' minds that there's necessary chaos. There's need to insert disorder to create order. There's that whole thing, the storm, the
mm.
hailstone, very element of destruction that bring about
Right. It's the
life.
Ouroboros.
Yeah,
Or life comes out of death. vice
Yes.
versa.
Yeah. Which is seen across a lot of different cultures. It's not isolated to any sort of specific cultural view.
It's also, you're
Or
talking about Ragnarok. It's the same thing, isn't it? Like the destruction is necessary in order for new things to begin.
yeah, so like the Ragnarok theory, like or the Ragnarok, it's a big change. I've talked to some folks who understand Ragnarok as being just the time of the big change, and it's like it's not a poignant or specific thing that is one and done. It's that it's always happening. We reach multiple Ragnaroks. It's like there's a time when things need to die for new life to begin, and it's constant and cyclic and ongoing. That's largely, for me, how it goes. I mean, death is not an end. Death is not a one and done sort of thing. It has to happen to allow the next stage of the game to take place. So.
Yeah.
So touching more on the idea, just to go off on this because I'm interested in this a little bit, on the idea of Ragnarok. You know, I've always looked at it myself as, you know, like you were talking about, you know, the time of the change, the big change, and I've looked at it, you know, myself, and for me, I've always gone to assuming it was when Christianity took over and became, you know, started meddling it, you know, taking things from Norse, you know, religion and inserting itself here, you know, basically killing off the rest of the gods of the world, you know, for all intents and purposes. Does that, because you mentioned, you know, that it doesn't have a specific time and it's always changing, is that maybe one of those instances where you could say, you know, that was...
So I think that, like, it's an interesting concept to think about, Phil, because when Ragnarok and a lot of the lore was scribed down, right, it happened at a time of transition, conversion, which largely was due to either violence or persuasion in history. You know what I mean? So how that kind of translated into written form and how we read it now in modern times, because we're talking about stuff that was written down or documented 1,000+ years ago. You know, I think there's a lot of that to take into consideration. You know.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying, Phil, is you're describing Ragnarok as an end of an aeon or an era.
Yeah,
like
end of an era.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was probably largely due to the circumstances that were living or that existed at the time. Like I can tell you right now, like the stories as they're told in Scandinavian lore, before Ragnarok actually hits, right before that time comes about, there's what's called Fimbulvinter, and there is a time of literal extended cold periods. And this has literally happened.
Yeah, I was about to say
it
that.
Literally happened. Like there was a time where there was no summer, and for like a very, like, we're talking like 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever.
Yeah, way too fucking long.
Right, like there was no transition of seasons happening.
Yeah.
So when it was all documented, when it was all written, it was I think personally largely due to the climate at the time, and it was how people viewed the world at the time. Like, wow, like there's this big change about to happen, and this is what's going to happen. It's I think it's all subjective ultimately.
Yeah.
How you view it and how you look at it, you know, like because people could say, well, are you, you know, as a Norse pagan, are you, you know, looking at the gods in real time? Are you seeing the gods pre Ragnarok, or, you know, because if you're not, then you're looking at post Ragnarok, which changes the dynamic of the tribal structure of the Aesir, who are a specific tribe of the gods. It's very complex. And I don't think you would get the same response from any one group of heathens if you were to put us in the same
Yeah.
sort of discussion right now. It's very complex, but like Phil, like, you know, like saying like like a big change took place at a specific period of time, and that's why they documented it as such and kind of tied it to, you know, their to the gods that they were venerating at the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Jesse, do you watch the Marvel Thor movies and shake your head in disgust, or do you just not fuck with it?
I you know, so I really don't. The Marvel universe, MCU, like that whole thing, and that's its own thing.
I haven't kept up with that in so long.
It's,
Like,
I don't
game.
look at it. I'm like, what are you? I don't look at it.
You don't
and
get
all
pissed
like,
off. Yeah.
What are you doing to my gods? Or no, I don't. No,
That's good.
like, no, I don't. I
didn't mean to
that.
characterize it that way. I didn't
Like,
think you did.
Thor, you know, Thor is like, I like the fact of that Chris Hemsworth portrayed Thor in such a way that he did, because I think that he embodied the characteristics of Thor, even though like the visual aesthetic of it is like, he ain't blonde, he's, you know, he's red bearded, he's redheaded, he's, you know, like it's like the aesthetic of it is different, but the attitude, like the character, I'm like, he kind of like the way I see Thor, just hot tempered, action first, ask questions later. You know, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission kind of attitude. Like,
Yeah.
He kind of took on that aesthetic really well, or at least the character really well. Maybe not the aesthetic, but the character really well. So, but I definitely have a separation between the Marvel.
Do you watch them?
Well, I've seen
sometimes.
So I saw like, I mean, I'm horrible at keeping up with pop culture.
Yeah, I was gonna say
I've seen Thor and I've seen Thor Ragnarok. That's it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know I've seen a couple of them, but I don't even know how many there are, and I don't remember anything about them. There wasn't much memorable about it. It's just like an action flick.
Yeah.
I do remember that Hell was in it though, because when you were telling me about Road to Hell, I was like, oh yeah, I know about.
Yeah, well, that's another story too, for another time, because the portrayal of Hel being Thor's sister.
It was like Loki's daughter, right?
And Loki's, well,
I can't remember.
Hel in the Scandinavian lore, yes, like in Eddas and everything, it's Hel is the offspring of Loki.
Loki just likes to get it on.
Loki does, right? Loki
So
was the one
Odin.
who shifted shape to be the mare that sired Sleipnir, Odin's steed. So I mean, it's a totally different dynamic. So I definitely have a separation between the two.
I feel like it. Go ahead.
It doesn't grate my gears, like it doesn't grind my gears. Like I understand, like one is for, you know, Hollywood and everything is separate, but yeah.
Yeah. Fuck. God damn it! There's something I was gonna say.
I remember something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my favorite part of the very first Thor movie is when Odin goes to retrieve his children from Lafe, and he comes in riding that horse, and I'm like, you're literally riding your grandchild right now. It's the funniest shit ever. I love that so much.
Yeah, the actual stories of the lore are entertaining enough without the need of Hollywoodized grandeur. So that's my own thing.
I think I remember reading a story where Thor just murdered a family because they asked him to leave his house. He stayed for too long, and they ate him out of house and home, and they asked him to leave, and I think he murdered them all.
Well, there's stories of Thor, you know, going on his various adventures, and he, you know, stayed at a home, and specifically told them not to touch his goats because his chariot is drawn by Steer and Tom the two goats that draw his chariot, and the world of the family who he stayed with didn't listen. And the next day when Thor resurrects and one of the goats is lame because of a broken leg, because the child sucked the marrow out of one of the goat's bones, he then says, well, you're coming with me. He pretty much just commandeered this kid. He's like, well, you're mine now and you're coming with me.
Shit.
He just took ownership of this thing, like, you're mine now.
Get in the fucking sled.
This is Asgardian rules, bitch.
Damn. I love the really like obscure weird ones that seem to have lost their meaning. Like there's a Shinto, I think it's Shintoism. I hope I'm getting that right. There's a Shinto goddess of food or like harvest, and she like literally shits out like food, like entire apples and stuff. And there's a god of the moon, and the goddess of food invites the god of moon over for dinner, and then she's like shits in a giant bowl on the table, and then he's so disgusted and angered by it that he kills her.
Yeah.
And her it's so random. Her eyebrows slither off of her head, and that's where silkworms come from, in case you were wondering.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. There's
so
some
nice.
of that. There's some of those nuances in Norse mythology too. The earthquake are the result of Loki writhing in pain because of the poison that drips down on him after being bound due to his nefarious deeds and stuff. So,
damn.
There's all that kind of stuff too. Yeah.
In some instances, I've heard of Odin's wife being named as Freya, and other times it's being named as, or heard being named as Frigg. I just, what is the meaning of this?
Was that the question?
Yes, that's the question.
What is the meaning of this?
What is the meaning of this? That's a good question.
Did he just have two wives? Does she have two names? Does she have an Asir name and a name from Vanaheim or wherever she's from? I think that's where she's from, right? God, right?
Yeah. So that's a loaded question, because the differences between Frigg and Freya have changed. Well, so it really ultimately depends on, I think, how can we put this? A mother goddess figure. So Frigg is the oldest attested to name of this mother goddess figure. Some pagans will combine Frigg and Freya as being the same figure. I personally think that there's nuances between the two deities that separate them. Frigg is a Norse goddess of the Aesir, wife of Odin, and her the way she's spoken of in what limited ways she's spoken of in the lore kind of tie her to this sort of mother figure, goddess of the hearth and home is kind of the way that I look at her. Freya is a Vanir god, sister to Freyr, who's a Vanir god that is so there's a dynamic there's the Aesir and the Vanir, and in the lore in the Norse mythologies, there's this war that exists between the Aesir tribe and the Vanir tribe, and the Freyr and Freya are brother and sister, and they are of the Vanir tribe, which are usually attested to some of the more agricultural land, tied to the land, agriculture type stuff. But Freya is very popular within the concept of war and passion and sexuality and love and that sort of thing, whereas Frigg is more popularly attested to things of the hearth and home, caring for the things pertaining to hearth and home, whether it be family, that sort of thing. So I see them as two separate deities, but when you look at like historical elements and how the gods and goddesses of a certain area sort of evolved over time, there's nuances that separate a mother goddess figure like Frigg into some other things that are going on at the time. And Freya is represented in a more or in a period that is more during or post conversion in Scandinavia. So
Okay.
how much she existed or how much her elements existed or the idea of her existed in pre-Christian times is arguable, at least. Right?
Gotcha.
So
Okay. Interesting.
some pagans will say, well, they're one and the same.
That reminds me. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It is, I think like with so much of this, like you could poll a number of heathens or pagans and ask the same question. You probably get different answers depending on just what their approach is.
It's not the same thing, but this conversation reminds me of Marduk, which I believe is a Canaanite god, and he's got 50 names. Each name is for calling upon a different attribute of him. Like you can imagine this, like a man of many hats. It's like you call upon him for different, you call him different things depending on what you need. Yeah, but
different hats for what you need. But Odin is the same way.
hmm.
Odin is a god of many names, and you look at Grimnismal. I think we had talked about throughout this call about a popular TV show where, and I'm just going to call it out, right? American Gods.
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah.
Wednesday. It's probably been plastered all over YouTube and in various places where he's like, I am this, I am that.
Right.
Odin is known by so many names for various reasons and for many things. So the complexities of the deity kind of, carry out over time. But the differences between like Frigg and Freya, like for me, it's Frigg to me, and I'm just gonna like lay it out. Like Frigg is the goddess of hearth and home, the mother goddess, like settling down. Freya is kind of the party girl.
Oh, when you lay it out like that, I can see what you're saying.
She's so like we read about certain elements of like the afterlife and in the afterlife concepts it's Freya gets the first pick of the battle slain to come to her hall because she's attested to some things when it comes to warrior cult ideas and so she's closely attested to that in some of the stories, warrior class type.
If you wanted to, which obviously you wouldn't have to, but if you wanted to attribute both of those characters to an individual in different times in their life, you could do that too. Like she used to be more wild, now she's
Possibly.
calmed down. It's an
Yeah,
archetype.
yeah, possibly. But the thing with like the Germanic side of things is that Frigg, there's definite, um, maybe not Frigg in the name, but Frigg in the essence is
Mm.
much older in
Okay,
Proto-Germanic times.
I got you.
Like we have at least some historical elements that attest the elements of Frigg, of who she is, to Proto-Germanic times.
Mm.
Freya seems to be something that is, um, more modern, and when I say more modern, I mean like later than Proto-Germanic.
Yeah, maybe not modern, but more
Maybe not
modern.
like post
Yeah,
1000
right.
AD.
Just
You know what I
newer.
mean? Yeah, newish. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, so you said that you are, more, if I remember correctly, you're more on the literal side where you believe that the gods, they actually exist. Like,
Hard polytheist
poly-
is kind of, yeah.
okay, I am like that as well. And so when it comes to the difference between, Freya and Frigg, um, because I'm like you, I do believe that they are different. So are they both Odin's wife? Are they like how do you
Mm.
where did one go? Where or are they just both there and they're just never
I,
Maybe it's
I
different Odins with different wives, like different.
yeah. So I mean, for me, it's like Freya and Frigg are not the same. Freya and Freyr are brother and sister, and they are from the Vanir,
mm-hmm.
side, of the tribe of the gods. They're so the Vanir gods are, um, closely attested to more of the agricultural side of things, whereas the Aesir, like Odin, Thor, Tyr, um, some of those prominent figures are warrior class, warrior cult
Mm-hmm.
gods. So a lot of it is tied to regional approaches to spirituality.
Mm.
You have the Danes, you have the Frisians, you have, uh, various like historical, like ancient cultures that adopted an approach to their spirituality that was focused on their societal,
I
uh,
understand.
structure. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So you have a warrior cult or warrior class or warrior, a warband culture. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to focus more on the warband type tribes,
Mhm.
are like Odin and Thor and Tyr and, those prominent figures. The everyman, the everyday sort of culture is going to probably look at, which is interesting because when we talk about Thor, um, there's definitely historical approaches to Thor as being the everyman's god, not just a warrior class god.
Mm.
He's, his hammer and certain elements of Thor have, uh, historical things tied to him as being, fertility, um, wellness of the land, that sort of thing. So it's all very regionally based, like, just depending on what part of medieval Scandinavia or before that you're looking at. Me personally, though, like again, I'm a pretty, hard polytheist, and when it comes to the hearth and home, it's Frigg. When it comes to, passion and a little bit of the wild side and that sort of thing, it might be Freya. When it comes to, action before decision, it's Thor. When it comes to, um, you know
So are these gods? Are
just
they? Are they like sort of like the egregores we talked about, where they're concepts that have taken life, or is
very
it the other
much
way
so.
around? Okay.
No, I think it's very much so. I think it's very allegorical because, um, in ancient Germanic societies, it was nature based. It was, what means something. So they put a name to it. You know,
Yeah.
they 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 tied something that they could, tangibly
Hmm. And
try
that's
to
yeah.
connect with.
That's what all religion is it's a story or a parable to help you understand the universe. Um, it's not necessarily or ever literal. It's the art aspect of
Metaphysical.
it.
Yeah.
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 Like like um shit. I had oh yeah, the Book of Job in the Bible. It's like this. This is a book that it opens up with you have a man like the way Job starts is you have a dialogue between God and Satan. You don't get a frame of reference of who is telling that story. And this is something that a friend of mine brought to my attention because that used to leave a real bad taste in my mouth because I'd read that story and I'd be like, well, why would I serve this God? He's an asshole. Like, you're familiar with the Book of Job, right?
I am intricately
Oh, okay,
familiar with the
cool.
Book of Job. I have actually read the Bible, and I'm not just saying King James, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
not just saying Old Testament versus, I've literally read King James Bible, Old Testament and New Testament,
Oh,
cover to
neat.
cover, 7 times.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yes, I'm familiar with the Book of Job, and Job is a figure, to me, he was so self-righteous. He was so like, I'm Job. He had a little bit of haughtiness. He was a little bit, you know, there was some greatness to him attested to that in those stories, but at some point in some of those stories, it was like, check yourself.
His humility. He had to be humble.
Yeah. Yes.
Which, yeah. So, okay, cool. So we have some common ground here. Like, Job is my favorite book of the Bible, and it's the one I probably know the most about. Um, like, well, I mean, I don't know. That's debatable. But they're like, uh, no one's ever going to convince me that was something that literally took place. I mean, the way this is laid out, it's told like a story, like a parable, like, and we see this repeated throughout the Bible on many occasions where there's a common Hebrew phrase, 40 days, 40 nights. 40 is a number that just means a long time. It's not literal.
There's certain numbers that translate to sacred
Yeah,
aspects.
getting
7,
back into the
40.
metaphysical.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of that in Old Testament too. Judaism
Yep.
loves numerology.
And there's some of that in Norse mythology too,
Yeah.
because 9 is a sacred number for various reasons. You have 9 realms, just
Oh,
anyway, yeah.
yeah. To get this out real quick, I used to really not like Job because I was like, this is a guy who, I mean, his God is just letting awful things happen to him just to prove a point. Like, why would I serve this God? And I was like, Job's kind of he's kind of an idiot. Like, he's very gullible. Like, why would you serve
Scapegoat,
this guy
kind
that
of.
doesn't, yeah, he doesn't give a fuck about you. But then, like, a really good friend of mine brought to my attention that it's like, well, hold on. Job doesn't know that this conversation is taking place. All he knows is bad shit keeps happening to him. Like, he's not in on the conversation between God and the accuser, Hasatan. And that's, uh, and that totally changes the perspective because you're not supposed to read it looking at it from a third person perspective of seeing this. You're supposed to put yourself in Job's shoes because if you read it that way, what you learn from it is, well, things might be bad, they might be on a downturn, but Job is visited by the 3 wise men when he's at his penultimate
Yep.
torturing, and
Yep.
they try to persuade him to denounce God, and he says no. And that, to me, what I get out of that story now as an adult who's not a an edgy atheist teenager who just didn't like Christianity, but if I look at that practically, what that tells me is this is a story about, like, he's like, what good is it going to do me to just shake my fist at the heavens just because things are bad at me? What does that accomplish? Like, all that's going to do is make me feel even shittier than I currently do. So I can just be an optimist and hope that things will get better. And I mean, things turn around for him at the end. Now I really like that story.
Yeah. It's a very interesting, um,
But if you take it
Part of the
literally,
lore.
if you take that story literally and you think this God figure is in heaven having this conversation with Satan, it totally derives from the meaning. That story to me only has significance because it's a parable. The minute you try to, and you know, that's especially with the Old Testament, like ancient Jews didn't look at these stories and think that they literally happened. They understood that they were parables and they were attempts to understand the universe, and they just treated it that way. It's only recently that we attribute these things to being literal, like fundamentalist Christians. The world's made in 7 days. That's a new thing.
Yeah, because you look at the idea of what a day meant. You know,
Right.
a day is as 1,000 years. 1,000
Mhm.
years is as one day. You know, all this allegory, all this, you know, non-literal meanings that our mortal minds can't really
Right.
assimilate. But
You said something earlier, and this is way off topic. But you said we were talking when we were talking about household spirits. You used the term. I can't remember what it was.
uh, so I call them
Okay.
house whites, house spirits. Yeah.
And we were talking about you know, how that's not something tangible, like someone sitting next to you. It's sort of, it can be an epiphany or a feeling. And you said something that caught me. You said, or it could be an inanimate object being moved on its own. And I was wondering, is there a reason you use that example? Is that a personal example, or were you just being poetic?
Um, I guess a little bit of both.
A little both. Okay, fair enough.
So I've had encounters. So I have pets. I have house pets. I have dogs. Now, not everybody has house pets, but for me, my Husvatir exists and sort of represents their presence through the house pets. Now, they also represent themselves and give their presence known outside of that animate existence of a pet. So I've had instances where, like, my pets have sat and looked at a countertop where there was an inanimate object, and the inanimate object, they are focused so much on that specific thing that they can see something,
Hmm.
and I can't physically see it.
Right.
My physical eyes can't see it, but I can see what my house pets are focusing in on,
Hmm.
and they're giving some sort of, you know, verbal or some sort of tangible evidence, like, I see something and I'm making it known, and
Yeah.
then that thing moves, or that thing, you know,
You just sort of feel it
make
move.
some sort of animation. Yeah, like there's some
Right.
sort of animation. Specifically for me, it was, you know, um, a stationary object on a countertop that was a spice, like a literal container of spices. No to move, and it tipped over and rolled off of
Oh
the counter.
shit.
And my pets,
That's something I'm really interested in.
like my pets were looking at it, and they were like making some sort of, you know, in the way they do, they growl, or they, you know, focus on it in their own way. But I'm like, okay, they like that sort of thing. My husvatir, my house spirits like this sort of thing. They're making their presence known. Like, hey, this is the thing that I like. I like
Hmm.
spice. I like this sort of
Oh.
thing. So that
Oh.
to me was my own individual cultic observance of, like, okay,
Yeah.
they like it, so I'm going to give it to them as
That's my offering.
my
Yeah.
offering. Exactly.
That's awesome. Uh, the reason I brought that up is poltergeists. The idea of something moving and manipulating our physical reality is a concept
Hmm.
that's very interesting to me
Hmm.
because I've delved deeply into channeling and possession, um, where I've experienced bodily possession. I've been with other people who've experienced. Um, I mean, for me, it works for differently for everyone, which is something we talked about at the beginning.
Sure.
But for me, I'm able to maintain control where I look at it passively, say, say my hand is making a fist over and over again, I know I can stop it, but I'm going to allow it to happen to see what comes out of this. I'm humoring it, but I'm in control. I can stop it. I don't know that that works for everyone that way, but that's how it works for me. But and I've done that probably like 100 times, and since I was like 19 or 20, and
Right.
And I've done this. This is something that I've done with several different people who've all shared this experience with me. But one thing I've never seen is an inanimate object lift off the ground. I've never seen someone conjure flame out of their hands, and it seems. I'm not saying it's impossible. I would really like to see something like that because I've never seen a spirit interact with the physical world that way. It's usually interacting through me or through the medium.
Sure. So my own take on the way the spirit realm interacts with the profane. The house spirits, the localized Vatir, as we call them. They are tied to us in a way. There's been a lot of discussion recently between myself and we talked about earlier Eric's channel on the Ravens call about certain things. So when it comes to like the localized house gods or house spirits, how much we interact with them is almost a factor to how much they are displaying their presence, right? If we don't give them attention, if we don't honor them, if we don't recognize them, then they may get upset. They may indicate that they're like, hey, I'm being ignored, notice me, senpai, you know what I mean? Like I kid, but in a real sense, it's like, hey, you're sharing existence with me. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And if we neglect them, then it can reflect on the way the overall home functions in real time, right? So if we share existence with, whether it be a spouse or a loved one or a roommate or whatever, if the house whites are upset, that can reflect in the overall climate that we exist in the profane with the real people. So I try to, in the best that I can, maintain a good relationship with the localized spirits that I kind of coexist with, just to, give them some sort of assurance, like we're good, we're
It's good to be on good terms with your neighbors.
Yeah, exactly,
This is
exactly.
Good practice.
We want to just, like, I'm good, you're good, we're all good. But when things aren't good on one side or the other, there can be some indications, metaphysically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Things are awry in the home, in the hearth.
Yeah.
Arguments can awry, can come up,
Mm-hmm.
those sort of things. And that can be a outward representation of something that is awry with your hearth. And if your localized house spirits or housewives or husvatir, as we call them in Norse or Germanic paganism, if they're upset, then they can externalize that through an upset. In your just how you interact with the people who you share existence with. So we're sharing existence. We're sharing space, And for me, I want to make sure that space is amicable and that we are comfortable in all aspects, right? So if it means that I need to offer to them a certain thing on a regular basis, just to make sure that they're okay, like, and happy, that's an individual cultic practice that I adopt.
Mm-hmm.
What everybody else does is their own thing, their whole, their call,
Yeah.
their whole dynamic, that sort of thing.
I got you. The so you're talking about how that spice, like you knew that was an offering because of the indication, like you intuitively knew what to do with that omen. Um, well, I developed, which I haven't spoken to him in a while. I should. I developed a relationship with a familiar, and it was a black cat, um, both in personality and the way it manifested itself to me. It was just very feline.
Mhm.
And I just asked it. I was like, because I was deep into Liber Null and Psychonaut and beginning my path down chaos magic, and it was telling me about ritual, like how you can strengthen your connection to these things through offering and ritual. And so I built an altar, and then I asked it just straight up. I was like, "What can I offer you? What do you like?" And without missing it, like not missing a beat, the thing says yams. And I'm like, okay, that's random. And I looked it up, and apparently cats like yams, which I didn't know that. But cooked yams a cat will eat. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
The,
pretty
the,
wild.
the familiar elements, what we would in a Norse Germanic culture call the philia. Philia can take various forms. It can be animalistic. It can be human. Um, there's an element to that.
Yeah.
For me here with the whole spice thing, it was a pretty obvious thing that's like, we just like spicy stuff, dude.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
So it wasn't that
I'll keep
specific
that.
spice.
Wasn't
Yeah.
specific spice per se. It was just like anything that raises the spice level. Like we like hot things.
It's that
all right, cool. I
it's that
can drive with that.
profane.
Yeah.
It's that profane.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're talking about the sacred and the profane, it reminds me of gray magic, which is just the balance. It's the equilibrium. It's the yin and the yang, the mix of the white and the gray, of order and chaos. I would go as far as to say of the balance of the sacred and profane. Like it's just balance in general. The balance of, Baphomet is depicted as having a goat head and a serpent's tail, and he's got male genitalia and a woman's breasts. He's the perfect balance. He's an androgen. He's middle,
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to do. I notice, like, I tend more towards the chaos side, but pure chaos is, for one, unattainable, and B, like, it's not a good thing to aspire towards anyway. You want a balance in your life. And it's not good to be all order either. That's boring.
There's a balance. There's an intrinsic, definite balance between order and chaos. Me as a heathen, with the tribal elements, and I know we're wrapping things up, but it's order means something, and order needs to be maintained. When the chaos elements come in, then there needs to be that balance, but it's part of it, right? It's kind of part of it. So
it's like that duality exists in everything. It's like on every level there's good and evil. There's everything. It's balance, duality, everything. Yep. Well, Jesse, thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it. I've had a blast talking to you.
I've had a blast being here. It's great long discussion. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone, Alex and Phil and everybody who's been here, contributing to it. It's been a fun time. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to you again at some point in the future in some capacity.
Sure. Yeah. Just let me know.
And thanks for sitting in with us, Phil. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was fun.
All right. And thank you guys for tuning in and being here with us during all this. I don't have anything else to say, so go check out Jessie's channel, Midgard Musings. Definitely do that. There's a link right below. You don't really have an excuse now to just go fucking do that. You'll thank me for it. And while you're at it, subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to where you're at right now. And subscribe to yourself, because you need love in your life, and everyone's great.
Wow.
Wow.
Invest in yourselves. Invest in yourselves. You know, we're all quarantined. During this time, my whole thing would be like isolation. Focusing during this time has been on the self and has been on our own individual health. You know, so like Alex said, you know, subscribe to yourself. Invest in yourself. You are your own.
I'm glad you turned that train wreck into something. That was funny.
No, it's good. It's a good segue.
Yeah.
I can jive with that. So, thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Of course, anytime.
Always remember the 3 magic words: please, thank you, and step off, bitch.
And what an epic note to end it on. Everyone have a good night. Goodbye.